break. But right now, I want to go live to Law&Crime's very own Elizabeth Millner, who is outside of the federal courthouse, was inside that court for when Casandra Ventura was testifying. Elizabeth, it's great to see you. I know you have to jump back into court quite quickly. So let's first start off with Ventura. She takes the stand. How did she appear? What are some of the highlights of her testimony? And most importantly, how is the jury responding to her testimony?
Yeah, well, Jesse, when she had first kind of entered the courtroom, I can't necessarily describe it as a tense moment necessarily, but I can only imagine what was kind of going through everybody's minds. You have Diddy's children on one side, his family on one side. You have Diddy, who was looking at Cassie as the moment that she walked inside that courtroom today. She was wearing a long brown dress. She is very, very much so, appears to be in her third trimester of her pregnancy. And so she kind of walked very quietly and very slowly up to the witness stand, took swore the oath and that type of sort, and then sat down for the prosecution's questioning. And as far as who her support was inside that courtroom, that included her brother, what we presume to be her mother, as well as even her husband, Alex Fine. And he was kind of the topic of some of these arguments outside of the presence of the jury, mainly about just some testimony that they're expected to happen, especially later on today or even possibly tomorrow, because she is expected to be on the stand for a while. But as far as when she got onto the stand, she was very soft-spoken when she was answering ASA Emily Johnson's question. We've been following this case from the beginning, from the moment that she had filed that federal lawsuit that was just very shocking, a very bombshell lawsuit that we all know was settled the following day. But as far as just kind of comparing the allegations to her witness testimony, it was kind of a difference in the sense that we had only seen her allegations through words, through paper, through court filings and that sort. But, when she got on the stand, it's now, for jurors in their minds, they're putting a voice and they're putting a person to, a name finally. They're seeing just from her side of the view, just kind of her relationship with Diddy. Much of the testimony was very foundational. When did she meet Diddy? How long before, the two engaged in sexual intercourse? As well as, she was briefly asked about the CNN video. And she did confirm that she was leaving a freak off when the vicious beating kind of happened. As far as just some other big highlights, we were shown a lot of photos of her and Sean, as she refers to him in court, as well as her friends. We saw a photo of him being Diddy, Kim Porter, another friend, and Cassie all at the 2006 BET Awards. We saw a photo of Diddy with Cassie, another friend, and another potential witness to this case, all sitting on a couch. We had seen photos of their trip to Miami. We saw photos of them at a strip club together here in New York City in 2007. For Halloween, she had spoken about just, her time working as an artist for Bad Boy, and just that pretty much, some of these allegations she had talked about in her lawsuit, but also that Diddy controlled a lot of aspects of her recording career. She signed a 10-album deal. However, she only put out one album plus a mixtape. A lot of the songs that she had even recorded had just gone either, unreleased, or they were leaked and that type of sort. And so some of those were like kind of the big highlights, I would say. They were kind of touching base on who all else kind of played a role in, as far as, security. She had named people like D-Rock and Bounds and Uncle Paul and Malik. As far as assistants, we heard one of the big names being Christina Coram, as well as David James, Neil Dominic. And so that was kind of touching base a little bit as far as, how Diddy's staff kind of interacted with her. But for the most part, another eye-opening point was just that, Diddy had security around him 24/7. But she also had said that, sometimes the security's job was to kind of check on her and make sure that she was doing what she was supposed to, essentially. That, if she wasn't answering the phone when Diddy had called, that he would send his security to go and find her. And so, as far as just some of the testimony, I'm sure we'll get into more details as far as kind of, the freak offs and that type of those types of allegations. But, it really did start off pretty foundational. And I was pretty surprised at, how composed she was keeping it all while on the stand. Again, she was very soft-spoken, but she answered the questions directly. If there was something that she was confused about or wanted Emily Johnson to rephrase or just to ask again, she was open about that. There were very brief moments of laughter, but that was just because, it was nothing that had to do with any of those graphic allegations or anything like that. But it was just, pretty much she was asked, like, why didn't you release more albums? And she's like, is that a question for me? And then there was a little chuckle, but for the most part, it was very much a serious tone. A lot of eyes were on Cassie. A lot of eyes were also on Diddy's children when they were talking, for example, about Kim Porter and just how that relationship had ended while Cassie was starting her relationship with Diddy. And so we got to kind of see finally for a while now, because it's almost been 2 years since she had filed her lawsuit at this point, that we kind of got to see her explain her own view from her own mouth, as opposed to us seeing these allegations in like lawsuits and that type of sort.
So I have two questions for you. One, how is the jury responding to her testimony and more of the graphic points of her testimony? But also, what was Diddy doing? What was Sean Combs doing? Was he looking at her? Was she looking at him at any points? So again, what was the jury's reaction and what was the reaction between Diddy and Cassie?
Well, let me tell you, it was a very packed courtroom, so it was really hard to kind of see all the jurors in their faces. But from the little view that I got of just seeing these jurors, they were listening intently like they have been even since yesterday, taking notes, kind of watching back and forth, both, the prosecution asked their questions and then going over and kind of looking at the witness, that being Cassie, while on the stand. Now, as far as Diddy goes, he was watching very intently. Like, let me tell you something. He is very much so participating in his defense. He is jotting notes down. He's passing these notes, because we do know when the cross-examination comes down, it's going to be Ana Maria Esteval who's going to be doing that line of questioning once the defense does get to the cross of Cassie's testimony. But as far as Diddy goes, he definitely kept his eyes on Cassie for the most duration while she was on the stand, which I can only imagine felt intimidating on her end. Possibly, I'm obviously not in her mind, so I don't know that 100% or anything like that. But as far as Cassie looking back in Diddy's direction, even when she had gotten off the stand, she didn't look at him once. She just walked immediately outside through the gallery, didn't look at him, didn't look at his children. There was no type of like soft smile, none of that. I think, even she might not have noticed her husband was right there in the courtroom too, but she kept laser focused, got out of the door, and then that's when everybody else kind of left the courtroom for lunch break.
Pretty surreal, to say the least. Let me ask you this. At the beginning of the day, we kind of got a sense of what's going to happen next. Everybody's been talking about the freak-off tapes or these sex tapes and how they're going to be visible in the courtroom, whether or not the gallery is going to see these tapes. I imagine when she's going to have to talk about these tapes, she's going to have to view these tapes. What was the discussion earlier this morning regarding the tapes, how a witness will be questioned about the tapes, and whether or not anybody in the gallery will ultimately see them?
Yeah, so there was a lot of concerns about these exhibits, mainly more so, I guess, from us on the press ends portion, just seeing that these photos were sexually explicit and very graphic in nature. The government planned to show some of these images because they, according to the government, were 6 still images. They were nude images of victims that were sexually explicit, but the government kind of came up with a solution that, they would provide headphones to the jurors so that way, we wouldn't hear any type of audio of, these exhibits that were going to be portrayed. The government wanted to keep this material out of public record. The defense, meanwhile, says it's pretty much adult pornography. And so that's when we kind of started connecting the dots that these were, videos and images of, these freak-offs that the government is kind of talking about that's central to their case. The defense says it's a privacy issue, and they question what us in the press would pretty much do with these types of images. And you know what? We have a right to kind of talk about them, especially not in a salacious manner or anything like that. I don't think that was any of our intents on, being in the courtroom while these images were played or anything like that. But apparently it seems like, a point for the defense that, they were just wondering what the press would do about it, especially with so many eyes on this case. And so, they wanted to address this issue. The media did have a response through a lawyer. Not 100% sure what outlet they were with, but the media's response was pretty much that the press needs to see these. The testimony isn't necessarily suitable for these images because, the big question is, was this consensual or was this coerced? And so the media lawyer, offered maybe just the pool reporters to see these types of images, so that way there would at least be some media in the room, so that way we could a report about this. And so from the media's response, they completely objected to total sealment of these images and says that it's a First Amendment issue. And so this is going to be taken up probably at a later time, possibly when we all come back from the lunch break, just to kind of get a better picture of it. But it seems like, from both parties that they're kind of fearful about these images getting out. But on our side, we have a right to report on what's going on. I mean, look at just the media campouts just behind me. A lot of people have interest in this, not just for salacious headlines or anything like that, but because this is a very high profile and criminal case. And of course, we will respectfully report on it if we are able to see these images.
Real quick, Elizabeth, I want to get you back in that courtroom. 30 seconds. If you could just explain what the scene is like today.
Well, the scene is very much so a lot of high energy, a lot of anxious energy, and maybe I'm just saying my own personal feelings because it was pretty tense this morning as a lot of people were just trying to battle to get inside that courtroom because everyone wanted to be in there when Cassie took the stand. Everyone wanted to see her raise her right hand, swear an oath, and to get inside that courtroom. So there was a little tense moments from people either cutting in lines or people trying to get ahead as well. But as far as, from the family's perspective, I had mentioned yesterday that the daughters had walked out during Daniel Phillips' testimony. That wasn't the case today. Everyone stayed in court, stayed in place. They were listening to all the testimony that was going on today. And so for the most part, it just seems like, okay, this is day 2. A lot of people are just wanting to know more information. What are we going to be getting out of this case? Is this a criminal case, or is this, very much so possibly a domestic violence case, as the defense is trying to kind of paint it out. But as far as the mood inside that courtroom, it's very tense, I will say, mainly because a lot of people just have their eyes on this very important testimony from one of the biggest witnesses and one of the biggest players inside this case today.
Elizabeth Millner, thank you so much for being our eyes and our ears about what's happened in that courtroom. No cameras, no audio equipment, but we got Elizabeth, and she does a fantastic job. Thank you so much. And I know you have to head back into court. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right, so we're going to continue to take your questions. I am here once again with trial attorney Rich Schoenstein. So, Rich, you heard that description, okay? You heard the description about her testimony. We've been talking about it, hearing the jurors' reaction, hearing, by the way, how Casandra Ventura responded, or lack of response, towards Diddy, not even looking over his way, him staring intently at her. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting, and it's hard for a witness, what's the right thing to do? Is the right thing to look at him? Is the right thing not to look at him? I think probably not looking at him is better optics as she takes the stand. I think that's fine.
When she's going to be in a position where she has to watch these tapes, presumably that's what's going to happen, and have to be questioned about these tapes, both under direct examination and cross-examination. I know Elizabeth has said she's very calm and composed. I wonder if things might change then and what we should take away from that testimony.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a tough thing to do. She's going to be asked about the tapes. She's also going to be asked to describe what's happening. She's going to be asked to identify people who are in that video. She's going to be asked to, identify the prostitutes, right? Because that's a big part of this case. So who is paid to be there in these videos? And she's almost going to have to do like a play-by-play, and it's incredibly uncomfortable. I don't know how she's going to deal with it.
I think the most significant parts of the tapes are if you see or hear Sean Combs directing her,
right,
and particularly in a aggressive manner to take certain steps or actions, that will go towards sex trafficking.
Yeah, and she's probably been through these tapes. I mean, they've taken her through them many times to prepare for the trial, to go over, to get the case ready, to figure out who everybody is. So it's a little different when you get on a witness stand and do it in front of a jury, but it's not the first time she's looking at it.
We're taking your questions right now again on YouTube as we wait for the testimony of Casandra Ventura to resume. Question from Nomad: how many kids does he have? I believe he has 7 children. Question from Sarah McGowan: can charges for co-conspirators come from this trial?
Well, I don't think they come from the trial necessarily. They come from the investigation leading up to the trial. And it's a question here whether the government wants to bring charges against co-conspirators or others. I think they were more interested in having witnesses. I said when this all started that probably people were deciding if they were going to be witnesses or they were going to be defendants, because I bet the government brought some pressure to bear on that decision.
Question from Alpha and Omega Forever. Will the prosecution subpoena other celebrities seen in the evidence later in the case? That's presuming there are celebrities that are, well, let me rephrase. In the lead up to this trial, during the jury selection process, there was a people and places list, right? Does the jury know any of these people and places? There were some celebrity names on there. Doesn't mean they're in the tapes, doesn't mean they're part of relevant evidence, but will the prosecution subpoena celebrities in this trial?
Yeah, I don't know. That goes back to the discussion we were having. Is it actually in the prosecution's favor to drag other celebrities into this and make it maybe seem like a Hollywood thing? If they had certain people who had important testimony to give and were willing to cooperate and do it, then they might want to put it on. But I don't know if that's happening.
Question from Rachel Wilson. If people outside the courthouse admit they're trying to influence the jury, not just protesting, could they be held accountable for that?
I don't know if they can be held accountable. You know, we see this now in trials. There's a trial some people are watching in Massachusetts where there's been a big fight about who can be in front of the courthouse and how far do they have to be from the courthouse.
For anybody who doesn't know.
Yeah, that's it. You've heard of it. So if it starts to be a problem, then the parties can address it with the court. And the court has some power to say, yeah, we're not going to let anybody line up where the jurors come in and out because that would be hard for them, right? That's the one thing you don't want them doing, is influencing the jury. Otherwise, people will have a right to be outside the courthouse. They have a right to make their opinion known.
I will tell you, the time that I saw this in a way I've never seen before was Johnny Depp Amber Heard. When I was in that courtroom, when Amber Heard was testifying, the courtroom was filled with Johnny Depp supporters. And I will tell you, as she was testifying, there were snickers, there were people murmuring under their breath. The court deputy had to come over and tell people to be quiet. That created a different environment, and I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And that was a problem, because from a purely legal point of view, you don't want that outside pressure on the witnesses, on the court, on the attorneys, on the jury. I didn't like it.